Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad that you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We're going to be continuing on with our dialogue with David Christopher, the author of this book, The Holy Universe. David was an airline pilot in an early iteration of his life, and through his study of evolutionary biology, of ecopsychology, of deep ecology, of cosmology, he became actually a bit of an activist and got involved in the Pachamama Alliance, which has as one of its tenets protecting the Achuar people of the Ecuadorian Amazon that is being invaded actually by oil companies, big oil companies from the United States, from Korea, from China, and elsewhere. And they're trying to take the beautiful biodiversity of that area, one of the richest biodiverse areas of the planet, one of the lungs of the planet, and turn it into oil profits. And David was very moved at contemplating that and got very involved. It happens I'm involved in that too, something we discovered only after I fell in love with his book, The Holy Universe. So, David, I'm so glad you're here on A Better World again.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank
you.
Absolutely. So, tell us, if you would again, just a little bit of what was behind your interest and incentive to write this book. This book is an awesome piece of epic poetry on one hand, yet it's articulating science and principles in science, all the way from the creation to the mechanics of washing dishes and the importance of love and compassion in our lives. So if you would just talk to us about what was in this for you.
I was hungry for a holy text. I'd grown up in the Episcopalian Church, and while I came away from that way of looking and that literal interpretation of the Bible, I left and I didn't have a real story after leaving that story behind. So when I learned of Brian Swimm's work, I actually saw Brian Swimm and Sister Miriam McGillis from Genesis Farm down in New Jersey, and they were telling of the new science of creation that went beyond the mechanistic story of creation. And I loved that story and just ate it up and lapped it up and learned, as you mentioned, Elizabeth Sartoris, David Christian, the man who's behind the Big History program that's actually on TV quite a bit now. And I was really missing something. I was really missing the sound of the scriptures and the cadence and the lyricism of the liturgy. Because even though I didn't adhere to what was actually that literal interpretation, I missed the poetry, and I was really wanting that sound of the King James Bible reflected in a scientific story. So that really was one of the impetuses behind it. And as I was talking with Dwayne Elgin about lamenting the fact that there was no story like this for people who, well, we call ourselves spiritual but not religious, really in some cases because we don't know what else to call ourselves.
Yeah.
And he encouraged me to go ahead, why don't you write the story? And he offered his assistance. He was actually, I call him the godfather of the project. And that really was the beginning of creating this particular book.
That's beautiful. Storytelling anchors our communities.
Oh,
it's
yes.
probably the oldest art form
Yeah.
on the planet. Well, dance, music, are certainly among them.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Well, certainly. And I mean, the book opens up with story, the importance of story.
Yeah.
And the sage actually sends the seeker off when the seeker says, I don't see why story is so important, and has him do an exercise of what I call the birthday story. Go throw a birthday party for someone and have them tell the story, and have others tell stories about the person, and see what happens.
Yes.
And we're story-making beings. We love it. We crave it. And we need that story. So we have story no matter what. And our modern story has been one of alienation, meaninglessness, the mechanistic universe. That's the old scientific story.
We have a story of separate
Separation, yes.
Ism,
Yeah.
you know, it's become an ism.
Yes.
You know,
Or scientism.
isolationism, scientism, exactly. So
Edward Abbey called it that.
everything is separative in nature,
That's the old story.
in appearance, exactly. And we need something, as you're saying, as people are leaving religions in throngs, where there's a very rich lore, by the way, and that's one of the appeals of religion,
That and community.
of the institution, and what?
And community, too.
And community, exactly. And the thing that so much binds the community is the stories
story.
they tell, as
Yes.
you're putting very well, you know, the King James Bible
The
and
Torah, the
and
Quran.
Torah, exactly. So people sit around the fireplace, they sit around the hearth, which of course has the word heart embedded in it, and they hear the stories of old that grandfathers told and great grandfathers told, right? And mothers, and they feel this warmth. And if you want to think about it physiologically, oxytocin is getting released into the system.
Yes.
The love hormone,
Yeah.
the bonding hormone, and they're getting closer and closer, and it's around that spine, if you will, of a story. So I've got to just say, what you have done is provided a new story for the new mind. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about this idea of ancient mind and modern mind and planetary.
Well, ancient mind is where I put the creation of the story of connection. Homo sapiens came into existence, again, depending on the science, somewhere between, somewhere between 100, 200,000 years ago is where our modern form, and don't quote me on that particular piece. What I'm focused on is when Homo sapiens, the animals that we are now, began to really develop language. We had the capacity to develop language. And about 50 to 100,000 years ago, it became so nuanced and such a strong tool that we began to tell ourselves stories. The stories about who we are, where we came from, what is our place on Earth. And the essential story of ancient mind, as we came out of Africa and spread across the globe, 10,000 stories, 10,000 cultures, some more warring, some more peaceful. There are all kinds of cultures out there. But for the most part, the essential story is that we are connected. We are connected to each other. We are connected to the web of life. We are connected to the cosmos. We belong here. And even our enemies, we're connected to our enemies. There was that fundamental, even with the strife that was sometimes happened in the clans. Now, as we got serious about agriculture, systemic agriculture about 10,000 years ago, modern mind came forward with a new story. And the story of modern mind is one of separation. We're separate from one another. We're separate from Earth, and we're separate from the cosmos. There's a special place for us. And we can do whatever we want to the web of life without consequence. And that story of separation really got going about 400 or 500 years ago with the European Enlightenment, with the Renaissance, when science started telling the Industrial Revolution, when science really started telling a story of a meaningless universe, a mechanistic universe, the great machine, as David Courtney calls it.
The Newtonian perspective of universe as clock.
Yes. And that essential story, as opposed to we are connected, is we are separate. And that is what you see. This is the built environment that we've created came out of that worldview. The social structures we have came out of that worldview. Now, planetary mind is what is now emerging, is that waking up to we can't do whatever we want to the earth without consequence. We are connected to everything. We are connected. Our actions reverberate. You pull one part of the web, and at some point, every piece of the web moves. It's affected by it. And planetary mind, using the science, that what I found so fascinating was the science is beginning to say this universe is behaving as if it knows what it was doing. The organization of it is so rapid that at one point Ken Wilber says it would have taken, if the universe were to happen by chance, it would happen once every billion years. But we're here after 13 billion years. So chance alone, for me, and the sage character says this too, is a deeply unsatisfying explanation.
Right, explanation. Yeah.
And this idea of a self-organizing, self-creative, intelligent universe is beginning to make more and more sense, and science is beginning to agree with what indigenous people have known all along, that we are connected.
Isn't
we are
that
part
interesting?
Of, yes.
You know, you're reminding me, David, of something I heard on CNN just the other day in relation to what's going on in Russia and Crimea and Ukraine. And it was so funny because it's these notions of planetary mind that we're speaking of here are actually hitting mainstream in this way. It came out like this. Many people want Obama to be more hard line in dealing with this political issue that's arising.
Yes, right, yes.
And the Europeans, on the other hand, who receive so much gas and oil from Ukraine, have a different perspective because they're so invested in what's going on there. So what emerged was, and what this expert was saying, is that the Europeans realize that whatever they do to the Russians, they're also doing to themselves.
Yes.
That they're so interconnected that to go like that has an instant consequence on themselves.
Yes.
That in a sense, they have an entangled mind,
Yeah.
and they are truly one and the same.
And it's interesting as that becomes more and more conscious.
Exactly, and so I'm saying this because here it is on CNN where they're realizing this higher truth, if you will, and it's showing up in an economic and political reality staring at us in the face. That the move of one piece on the chessboard affects the entire, right, exactly.
The whole game, yes.
The whole game, yeah. Would you read a selection?
Certainly. It was a time of no time, for time did not exist. A place of no place, for space did not exist. It was a beginning like no other, for there was no before. There was no time, there was no place. There was only the infinite and the unfathomable mystery. And the unfathomable mystery was all that was to be. And all that was to be was small, smaller than the tiniest particle, in the tiniest atom, in the tiniest dream. Although, there was nowhere from which to see how small all that was to be was. For there was no outside and no inside. No here, no there, no now, no then, no darkness, and no light. There was nothing save a whisper of what might be. An infinitesimal, indescribable, unfathomable mystery. And out of the unfathomable mystery, the infinite called forth to itself. It called forth space. It called forth time. It called forth being. And in that ecstatic instant, the universe slammed exploding outward into existence with all the jubilant and breathtaking beauty, brightness, energy, violence, power, and glory of a trillion newborn stars. It was a perfect explosion. 1/trillionth of a second slower, and the universe would collapse back into itself, unfulfilled. 1/trillionth of a second faster, and the universe would spin out, dissipating into nothingness, never to create galaxies, stars, planets, life, nor us. A perfect explosion. And in the instance of this perfect explosion, the universe began a brilliant and fierce cycle of gloriously creating, violently destroying, and gloriously creating once more, as if it knew what it was doing. So that is the beginning of the story that the sage tells the seeker, and continues with the creation of galaxies, stars, the second generation stars, which brought forth planets, life. And it very much, one of the things I was very interested in, was very important to me, was to make sure that it was as scientifically, it was as friendly and true to the science as possible. That's what I was really looking for.
You hit it. You
Thank
really hit it. You know, as I told you.
Well, I should interrupt you. Something hit it.
Yeah.
When I put the pencil down, when I wrote that, I looked at I can still see myself in the room I was in, putting it down and thinking, where, all right.
Where did that come from?
Well, where are you? I began to think, well, muse. Okay, so maybe there are muses. Airline pilots do not believe in muses.
Homer wasn't kidding.
No. Yeah, so it was when I spoke with my own teacher about it, we talked about, where do I have the right to say copyright? Like, I wrote this.
Right.
And he said, well, you did write it, and Spirit wrote it. It's a paradox.
Exactly.
Plus, you got to protect your copyright too.
Right. Exactly.
So it's a very
there are many layers of this reality.
Layers, yes.
Let's be real, right?
Yes.
So Spirit needs a hand
Yes.
and a computer.
Yes.
True. No, one of my favorite people of all time is a man named Dr. Hubert Benoit. Very few people actually know about him, but he was well known in his time. He was actually a colleague of Gurdjieff's, and I had the great honor of meeting him back in the late 80s in Paris. And he said in a book that he wrote called The Supreme Doctrine, that had a foreword by Aldous Huxley, to give you an idea
Yes.
of Benoit. D.T. Suzuki said, "This man understands Zen better than anyone in the West that I have ever known." And I translated a book of his actually years afterwards, but he said, when he was asked, where did your understanding of Zen come? After all, you're a French psychoanalyst and pianist. What do you know about Zen? And he said, nothing.
Right.
He said, but somehow I opened up, and some energy, some frequency I became part of, and it became part of me.
Yeah.
And it became, in a sense, that voice that instructed me
Yes.
to write what I did.
Yes. And I remember too, as I was writing, there would be times where it was just clear, this word belongs here. And he goes, where does this come from? I mean, it's fascinating.
You know, I've got to say, in all respect to our audience, both here present and in our TV land, you know, it's sort of like what the Sufis say. It's like sending a kiss by messenger, you know. Without reading the book, you don't get the wholeness of the juice of the heart of it, you know. And so I'm really grateful that you read some, and of course we'll read a little bit more soon, so everyone can have the collective experience of the intelligent and poetic nature of what you and Spirit have done. You know?
Yes, yes.
You know, really. We're just about out of time. I just want to say how grateful I am to you for having written this book. It reminded me of a time when I was actually in my mid-20s, and I realized, I had mentioned this to you earlier, David, how distant I felt and alienated and separate from science and math. I was a social scientist, I was a psychotherapist, I was into the arts and theater, and I had no real relationship with math or science. Yet, my knowledge was enough to know that math was the basis of all music, and music was the basis of all the universe. So I knew I was missing something big by not having any living relationship with those. And my intellectual curiosity brought me there, but then a wall came because the textbooks were so boring. I could not make my way.
Yeah.
And so
they're written in in that worldview.
Exactly. It's a linear thing.
That you just simply it treats us as if we are machines and as if we're logical beings, which we're not.
Exactly.
We're non-logical beings primarily. We have logic, But we
That's
are
right.
the non-logical, and I say that and non-rational, and that's a very distinct from the irrational.
That's right. I would like to say that we're logical, but we're not rational. That'll be another conversation.
Mhm.
But in my musings about my blockage about math and science, I came up with the idea of writing like a Socratic dialogue
Right.
in the form of being like Jungian types would be dialoguing, someone who is intuitive and someone intellectual and somebody emotional and someone kinesthetic, and carrying on a dialogue that was a story.
Yes.
So it all comes back to story. So
Yes.
we're out of time. I want to just thank you so much, David Christopher,
welcome.
for being on the show again and
Thank you so much.
sharing your intelligence and wisdom with us.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Visit us at our website, www.abetterworld.tv. I love hearing from you, so write and share your thoughts and feelings, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Applause.
Thank you.